Subtraction with signed numbers. So as an intermediate step while you're learning how to do it, you can rewrite a subtraction as adding a negative. And like I said, I think of this as training wheels. Do it until you feel comfortable doing it without it. So here we have a subtraction. You can rewrite it as adding a negative. And I actually recommend doing this in your head even after you become comfortable with this, because I want you to think of this as adding numbers with different signs. So you subtract the smaller absolute value from the larger absolute value, but keep the sign of the number with the larger absolute value. Let's do another one. Let's look at this example. We have -5 and -12. And you might be wondering, these two symbols look exactly alike. This is actually a tiny bit smaller, but it's not required to write it that way. But why is this one called a negative and this one called a minus? Well, negative is a sign and minus is an operation. A sign can be in front of a number that's by itself, but the minus operation can only occur between two numbers. But we're going to rewrite the minus operation as adding a negative. Because this way it's easier to see that you're adding two numbers with the same sign. So you just add their absolute values. 5 and 12 make 17. And because you're adding two negative numbers, the result is negative. Let's do another one. So we have -4 plus 6 minus 8. Let's rewrite this minus as adding a negative. And you only need to do that until you're comfortable doing it in your head. Now from here, there's two different ways we can do it. One way is to just go left to right. -4 plus 6. They have different signs, so you're going to subtract 6 minus 4. Keep the sign of the larger and bring down the rest. These two have different signs, so you're going to subtract the absolute values. So 8 minus 2 is 6, but the one with the larger absolute value is negative, so the result is negative. So one reason you can rewrite these minus as adding a negative is because addition is commutative. Remember that you can add numbers in any order and you'll get the same answer. So now that this is all addition, you can rewrite it by putting the negative numbers together and the positive numbers together. And this is just an option, it's not required. So -4 and -8 have the same sign. So we're going to find the sum 4 and 8 make 12, but because they're both negative, the result is negative. Bring down the rest of the problem. And now we have numbers with different signs. So we're going to subtract the smaller absolute value from the larger absolute value, but we keep the sign of the number with a larger absolute value. So addition is commutative. You can add numbers in any order you wish. Is subtraction commutative? If subtraction was commutative, then 7 minus 3 would be equal to 3 minus 7. Let's calculate both and see what we get. So just for practice and just for now, we're rewriting our subtraction as adding a negative. You only need to do this for as long as you need to. So we subtract the absolute values. 7 take away 3 is 4. And keep the sign of the larger absolute value. 3 minus 7 can be written as 3 plus negative 7. So we subtract their absolute values, but we keep the sign of the larger, and we get a negative. You'll notice they have something in common. It's the same digit, but the opposite signs. And that's actually always true. If you subtract in the opposite order, you get the opposite answer. But to answer our first question, is subtraction commutative? Because 4 is not equal to negative 4, that answer is no. And we can use the not equal sign. All right, let's do a few more examples. All right, negative 20 minus 3 plus 5 minus 8 can be rewritten as negative 20 plus negative 3 plus 5 plus negative 8. And because addition is commutative, if you wish, you can add the negative numbers together first, or the numbers with the same sign first, and then add the numbers with different signs. Or you can just go left to right. You should get the same answer either way. So let's go left to right. Negative 20 and negative 3 have the same sign, so you add their absolute values and keep the sign. Let's bring down the rest of the problem. Negative 23 and positive 5 have different signs. So you're going to subtract 5 from 23, which is 18. But because the larger one is negative, we keep the sign. Just for reference, I like to underline the operation that I'm going to do so that I can check it in the next line. All right, now we have two numbers with the same sign, so we're going to find the sum. So we just add their absolute values. 18 and 8 make 26. But because they're both negative, the result is going to be negative. You'll recall from the previous video, we talked about the opposite of the opposite, or we can also say the negative of a negative is positive. And also, When a number is touching a parentheses, that means that multiplication is implied. So let's look at two examples and see if you can see the difference. So in both examples, we have the negative of a negative. But what's different about this example and this example? If you said that this example is not touching, you'd be correct. So here, the 5 is multiplied by the negative of the negative. This is 8 minus negative 2. Let me write that down. So because the 5 is touching the parentheses, it's multiplied by the negative of negative 3. I'm going to just rewrite it. So you can do the negative of the negative first, and remember that that makes it positive. So this is just going to be 5 times 3, which is 15. 8 minus negative 2. Well, the negative of a negative makes that a plus. So this is not times because the 8 is not touching the parentheses. And it might be worth memorizing these two examples because you'll see things like this again. All right, let's do some examples. So we have negative 10 minus negative 2. And you can tell that's a minus because it's an operation in between two numbers. And you can also tell that these are not multiplied because the parentheses is not touching the 10. So the first thing you want to simplify is the negative of a negative. That makes that a positive. And because that was a minus, this becomes a plus. So these numbers have different signs. So you find the difference, which is 8, and keep the sign of the larger. Let's do another one. So here we have 5 minus 8 minus negative 4. We can rewrite the minus as adding a negative. And this is optional. This is not optional. If you have the negative of a negative, you need to make that into a positive. And then you need to ask yourself, are these multiplied or not multiplied? Well, because the 8 is not touching the parentheses, this is not multiplied. So that becomes a plus. And then because all of this is addition, you can rearrange the terms if you wish, or just go left to right. Positive 5 and negative 8 make negative 3. Negative 3 and positive 4 make positive 1. Let's do another similar example. 7 minus 10 minus negative 9. And I would recommend hitting the pause button and trying it on your own before watching me work it out. All right. So one method is to rewrite the minus as adding a negative. So that's 7 plus negative 10. And then the negative of a negative is a positive, so that's going to be positive 9. But you have to ask yourself, are these multiplied or not? And the answer is they're not multiplied because the 10 is not touching the parentheses. So that's going to be plus 9. So positive 7 and negative 10 make negative 3. Negative 3 and positive 9 make 6. All right, this one's challenging. Let's do it together. So we have the negative of negative 5. So that's going to be positive 5. And we have to ask, are these being multiplied? And because the 2 is touching the parentheses, the answer is yes. So that's 2 times 5. And then here we have the negative of negative 3. So that's going to be a positive. And then are these parentheses touching? Well, the answer is no, because they're not touching. It's not a multiply, so that'll be a plus. And the order of operations, you want to multiply first, and then add, like that. Let's do another one. You'll notice that we have the negative of a negative, so we need to make that into a positive. So you need to ask, are these touching? And the answer is no. So that becomes negative 20 plus 4 plus 8. We can go left to right. Negative 20 and positive 4 have different signs. So you find the difference, which is 16. Keep the sign of the larger. Bring down the plus 8. Negative 16 and positive 8 have different signs. So we subtract and keep the sign of the larger. All right, in summary, when you're adding numbers with the same sign, you find the sum, and the result will have the same sign as the numbers you're adding. So you keep the sign. Positive plus a positive is positive. A negative plus a negative is always negative. When you're adding numbers with different signs, you find the difference, or you subtract the absolute values. What's the sign of the answer going to be? Well, it depends on which of these numbers has a larger absolute value. So the sign of the answer is the sign of the number with a larger absolute value. You want to make sure you practice adding and subtracting sign numbers before you go on to multiplying and dividing sign numbers. This is a lot harder than multiplying or dividing sign numbers. So you want to make sure you have it down before you go on so you don't confuse the two rules with each other. All right, that's it.